Welcome to Dear SQL DBA, a podcast for SQL Server developers and database administrators. My name is Kendra Little, and what we're talking about today is resources for SQL Server newbies. It's not a bad thing to be a newbie, and we are all new at things one time or another. We aren't born, unfortunately, knowing a lot like SQL Server, although some people it may seem like they are. So what I thought would be fun to do in this half-hour episode is talk about free resources where if you're just starting out with SQL Server, or even if you just want to go back to basics, these are things that are available to you for free that can really help you advance your knowledge in a lot of different directions. So I'm focusing on resources for SQL Server, and I'm focusing on free things. There are certainly a lot of great resources you can pay for as well, but I'm talking about free stuff in this episode. And also, there's so much cool stuff out there that I actually had to limit the scope. Because if I talked about all the awesome SQL Server blogs out there that might be useful for beginners, some are more advanced, some are more beginners, but that's going to have to wait till another episode because there are just loads of blogs out there. So I'm talking about free stuff for beginners, and I've limited my scope, so I'm not even talking about the blogs in this episode. I've got a page on SQL Workbooks for this episode that's got links to all of these things. So if you're listening to a recording of this in the car, you can search for SQL Workbooks, training resources for SQL noobs, and you will come up with a list. I'll also link to this in the comments on the YouTube video and on the episode URL itself. So let's get going. I've also got folks attending the webcast live, and I'm going to check out the Slack channel and see if they've got suggestions or comments about the links as I go that I can share with you too. My very favorite resource, I put at the top of the page. If I had to pick one top resource to say, if you're a beginner, you should check this out, it is absolutely SQL Server user groups. Now, this might seem surprising, but really, in terms of things that are going to be useful to you as a beginner, and that will stay useful throughout your career, meeting people in your area, if you have a local SQL Server user group, and there are a lot of them, meeting people face to face and talking to them about, hey, how did you start out learning about this? And how did you get your first job as a developer, as a DBA? How did you get into machine learning or whatever they're into? That insight and those connections are going to be incredibly valuable throughout your career. So finding out if you have a user group and getting started is key. You can find out online easily. The PASS organization, the Professional Organization for SQL Server, has on their website, like everybody else these days, they have a notification that you're going to use cookies, but they have a list of local user groups, and you can say, are there places in my region? You can search by keyword. You can find local user groups. I live in Portland, Oregon, and we actually have 2 user groups. We actually have more than one in my city in the northwest of the United States. They are around the world. They used to be known as local chapters. These are a grassroots organization run by people who like to have the SQL Server community, like to meet people, like to help people, and they want beginners to come to their group. You are invited. There is no minimum knowledge you have to attend your user group. And there's often free food to make it even better. Sometimes you need to make a $5 or $10 contribution to have the pizza if you want the pizza, but oftentimes these are sponsored and you even get a free dinner. I mean, can you beat that? I love my local user groups. There are also virtual user groups. Virtual user groups, the Professional Association of SQL Server also has a list of these, and you can check these out. You can attend the virtual meetings live and online. There is a ton of free training across different topics, from application development to data architecture to there's one called DBA Fundamentals. So if you're on the database administration side and you want fundamentals, you can not only check out what are their upcoming presentations and attend them live and ask questions, but they also keep an archive of recordings. So if you're more on the DevOps side, there is a virtual user group for that. These are more by topic than the local user groups. So I would actually say Yeah, check out your local user group and see if you can join them in person. Make those connections, absolutely. But also, even if you have a local user group, check out the virtual chapters as well. They even come in different languages these days, which is really, really cool. So the Professional Association of SQL Server, it is free to join. You don't have to pass a test to join or pay money, but you can become a member. You can also, I don't even think you technically have to become a member to attend any of the user groups. For the online ones, you do have to register, but it should be free of charge for all those events. Another thing that PASS offers is SQL Saturdays. To find SQL Saturdays, you go to SequelSaturday.com. And SQL Saturday events are particularly valuable for beginners because these one-day events, which are usually held on Saturdays, there are some SQL Saturdays that are held on Fridays, which I actually think is really cool. The event started being Saturday only, but then some folks around the world said, hey, you know, like, we would actually like to have this on a Friday. So let's have it on Friday. These events are really cool because they are really focused more towards beginners. You'll be able to see, if you attend one, you'll be able to see the session for the whole day, and the sessions do have levels on them. So you can really say, I want these particular sessions, and you can attend more advanced ones too and see, hey, what's this like? You can try different things. Most of the organizers do try to have a good amount of material for beginners at SQL Saturdays. They are typically either free or very low cost. Sometimes there is a fee for lunch that I think is usually $10 or less, but very, very affordable event. You are giving up a Saturday, but like the local user groups, you're going to get to meet people in your area. So it's worth checking out SequelSaturday.com and looking for events coming up near you. It may be a while before an event shows up in your area. It's worth getting it on your calendar early on and finding out about it. These are held all around the world in different regions. So upcoming right now, Athens, Bratislava. We've got lots of different places. Everywhere from Sydney, Australia to Iowa City is having SQL Saturdays soon. So really, really cool events, and you will get world-class speakers at SQL Saturdays who, some of them live in your area, some of them have traveled there to speak at this free event. There are also tons of ways to get help from the community. So let's say you're starting out with SQL Server and you're learning something and you're having a stumbling block and you'd like someone to help, but you don't have any colleagues that know the answer to your question, or you don't have a job. Maybe you're not even working with SQL Server yet. There are many people in the SQL Server community who answer questions for free. And the beauty of this is they won't judge you on your questions either. When we're starting out with something, it's natural to feel kind of awkward at like, oh, I'm asking I know this is a dumb question, but well, you don't even have to say that because the community around SQL Server, most of us remember very clearly what it's like to be starting out. There is a hashtag on Twitter, and I know that Twitter can often be a really cruel place. Like, there is a lot of noise on Twitter. There's a lot of anger on Twitter, but one little haven in the middle of Twitter is the SQL help hashtag. This, if you post a tweet and you include the SQL help hashtag, or what I not too long ago referred to as # SQL help, until someone told me that I sounded like a 90-year-old woman saying it that way because you say #SQL help. If you post a tweet with a question on it, there are people who monitor this hashtag and will help you find what the answer is. Maybe they'll send you a link to a URL that answers it, or maybe they'll ask you follow-up questions. If your question is really hard to answer on Twitter, they may say, oh, could you ask in more detail on a specific site where maybe you could include more of the code or just give more information than you can fit into a tweet. But it is generally a really positive, helpful hashtag on Twitter. One other place where you can ask Q&A is the SQL Server community Slack. The SQL Server community has a Slack that was started out by the folks who create DBA tools. DBA tools is a set of PowerShell tools for SQL Server. And these folks were putting together these free tools for SQL Server, and they created a Slack channel so that they could help discuss it. And then they said, hey, why don't we open this up to the whole SQL Server community? And we can have different channels for different purposes. You can join this for free. Anyone can join. And if you go to the dbatools.io site, they have information on how to get there. And there is a link that says by signing up. If you click on that link for signing up, there is a little web page form where you put in your email. They ask that if you do put in your email there, you do accept the invite, because Slack does check the ratio of invite requests to people who accept them. That's to prevent people just spamming Slack invites. So if you want to sign up, please do confirm your sign up. There is even, you guessed it, a SQL help channel in the sqlcommunity.slack.com site, and you can ask Q&A in there. And the format allows you to be more detailed in the questions that you're asking. And there are just really cool folks from the community who like to hang out there and who actually just want to help you with your questions. Great for beginners. I mean, and your questions can be anything from, I'm having a problem with this, to, I want to learn this. I want to learn this skill. Where would you suggest that I start? You can actually ask for more resources there, and people will tell you, oh, this is what's helped me in the past. Very, very cool. There's also sites where there is a ton of free learning online. There is so much in terms of rich documentation for SQL Server. And I mean, a list of free resources for SQL newbies would not be complete without this sort of most basic, boring link of all, but it's still really, really cool. SQL Server has a ton of online documentation provided by Microsoft. I still call this books online. This used to be, I mean, long ago, it was really interesting to have this online, because used to, you would download the SQL Server documentation, you know, or I guess now that I think back to it, you would copy it from, you know, the CD, from the install media that the SQL Server came on, and you would have this local books online tool that you would open up the little books online application, and you would search it, because the internet wasn't what it is today. But now we have a huge amount of SQL Server technical documentation online. It is the artist formerly known as Books Online. But this thing is like, you know, if you're trying to learn how to write a query and you're like, oh man, what is the syntax for select into again? Oh, okay, so if I'm doing order by, what are the different things I can do with order by? Oh, I want it, okay, what's the difference between an inner and outer join? You know, that kind of question. Or what does the model database do? You know, I'm learning these things. This is the place where they start now with the URL is docs.microsoft.com. That official documentation for SQL Server is hugely extensive and really, really detailed. And there are amazing things in it. I still use it all the time. I used it all the time as a beginner back when I installed everything on my laptop there. So we've got a question here. The question is, I'm looking for an opportunity as a SQL DBA. Will these user groups mind if I ask for any help? That is a great question about the user groups. That question is actually, I think, one of the biggest reasons they will not mind. The user groups, if you go to the user groups, well, one thing is often the user group is sponsored by one organization or another. Many of the organizations that sponsor them are recruiter organizations. So you may have the opportunity while you're at the user group to talk to a recruiter. That, you know, I would look up advice for working with recruiters. Adam Mechanic, he's a SQL Server community member. He wrote up a fantastic blog post with advice for working with recruiters and finding jobs, steps that you can proactively take to make sure the relationship goes well, things to look for, warning signs to look for. So let's see if we can find that one. Adam Mechanic Recruiter. That is and it's called, the post is called Playing the Third-Party Recruiter Game. It is at dataeducation.com by Adam. It's a fantastic post. So one thing at the user group is you may be set up for this conversation right there by having a recruiter there, but you aren't limited to just talking to the recruiter. before the meeting, if you show up a little early, you check around with people and say, hey, who's the leader for this user group? I would love to meet the leader and thank them for having this. And you'll be able to meet the person who leads the user group. They'll usually speak at the beginning of the session. And you can introduce yourself to the leader and say, thank you for having this user group. I'm really glad to be here. I am looking for a position. Is that something that is okay for, me to ask folks about at the group? And what will usually happen is that the user group leader will be really happy that you're there, that you're new, and they may even start introducing you to people. Oftentimes, they will ask people at the user group, hey, does anyone know about leads for a job at part of the session? And that will give you kind of an indication of who to talk to. So my experience is that generally these in-person user groups are fantastic for networking and for finding jobs. The virtual user groups don't work that way just because with the virtual user groups, people are from all over and they aren't usually about job seeking. Actually, now I'm like, I wonder if there's a job seeking user group. Now a virtual user group that focuses on job seeking. And let's look at the virtual user group page and search for the word job. That would actually be really cool. There is a professional development one. I don't know if that's usually about job listings, but it would be useful in terms of looking for a job too. All right. So SQL Server Documentation, books online, that will never get old. Getting used to its quirks and navigating it at the beginning is useful. There's also SQL Server Stairways. These SQL Server Stairways are on a site called SQL Server Central, and you can get all of these for free. SQL Server Central is a website that was actually started by Steve Jones. Steve Jones, along with, I believe, some other folks, was one of the founders of SQL Saturday as well. So he's a community member who had a lot of ideas about creating resources for the community that have really taken off. Now, SQL Server Central contains a lot of stuff, but one of my very favorite things that they have are called stairways, and it's SQLServerCentral.com/stairway. These are all free guides to different things. So depending on what you want to learn, these guides, they're like basically like an online book. They start at a very basic level and they build up. You have the opportunity to decide how far up the stairway you want to go. So if you're a beginner and you're like, well, I would like to learn a little bit about just data starting off. Joe Selko, who's a very famous person for programming in T-SQL, has a stairway to data that you can start out with in terms of understanding different data types in SQL Server. And you can go as far as you want with that from the beginning. You can also look at database design if that's where you want to go. You can look at different things about exploring database metadata. Like, okay, what are the different ways that I can come to look at the properties of a database? There's all sorts of different stuff, from tracing to PowerShell to the SQL Server agent. So whether or not you're more of a DBA or more of a developer, you can pick out these topics, and they do all start at the beginner level. So you could say, okay, I'm going to pick out about 6 different topics, and I'm just going to do the beginner stuff, or maybe I want to begin and, go to the expert level on some of them. It's completely up to you, and I think it's a really cool free resource. There's also a Microsoft Virtual Academy. Now, Microsoft Virtual Academy, I have a link on the page to an example course. The example course that I'm linking to is the Querying with Transact SQL course. The Microsoft Virtual Academy is basically free training online. If you want to get a foundation of T-SQL, this class, I believe, has 7 hours of videos, excluding labs. There are scripts that you can use for labs. There are little quizzes or assessments in the course, and you can step through and learn about using the select operator, joins, set operation. So depending on what you want to learn, there might be a resource on the Virtual Academy at the beginner level for you, and this is all information from Microsoft itself. That can be really, really useful. If what you want to do is learn on the go, there are tons of podcasts out there. Now, of course, I'm going to mention my own podcast, the Dear SQL DBA podcast. It's not all beginner content, but I also take questions. If you want to ask a question for the podcast that is a beginner question, I totally welcome that. And you can ask questions. If SQLworkbooks.com, there's a page where you can put in your question. You can also, of course, browse all the old episodes and listen to them on the go if you want to. There's another podcast where you can ask questions and get answers too. The Brent Azar Unlimited Office Hours podcast. You can join live. They meet every week. And you can ask your questions live in the recording session and see if you get an answer there. You can also look back at old episodes. Now, since their whole thing is Q&A, I don't think you can search the episodes by a specific topic. Their blog does have transcripts of the podcast. So if you're looking for, you might find a past episode. If you're doing a search, you might find it there, but fun to listen to on the go. There's also the Voice of the DBA podcast by Steve Jones, the aforementioned Steve Jones of SQL Server Central. And he talks about different topics. And I love Steve's podcast and I love his sessions because he's got like the best radio voice ever. And it feels like you're having a conversation with him. It feels like when I listen to his podcast, I feel like Steve is talking to me, which is just fantastic. And it doesn't feel like you're doing hard work, but you're still learning about a lot of stuff. And he's been doing that for a while. Let's open up his episode history here. And I just want to see how far the numbers go down to. So I'm seeing 85 items here on everything from dealing with managers to failure and DevOps and testing and tracking your consultants. I haven't heard that one. But yeah, lots of different stuff that you can check into. And these are not the only podcasts. If you guys who are in the Slack channel or using the GoToWebinar Q&A, if you have podcasts that you enjoy that I haven't listed here, feel free to share them too, because there are a lot of them. I don't have time to listen to them all. I know that Andy Leonard has a great podcast called Data Driven. I've heard that it's great, but I haven't actually had time to check it out yet. There are even more resources that are a little more advanced. There's GroupBy, which is a free online conference. It's at groupby.org. This is a conference where people can submit different sessions and then people vote on what sessions to have. This was started by Brent Azar of Brent Azar Unlimited. The people who vote often do want more advanced sessions, and that's why this isn't a pure beginner resource. But it is really cool because you may want to vote for sessions that are at a level that you're at, or you may want to browse a more advanced topic and just see what you can take out of it. Just because a topic is more advanced doesn't mean a beginner can't get something out of it often. So you can help shape what shows up in the conference, and you can also seek out sessions. These are all free and online, and they're by great folks in the SQL Server community, and learn about things. So at the past June event of this, there's sessions on how to monitor everything by Maria. I call her Maria Z because I'm going to try her name. Maria Zekordev. Oh, I probably didn't get it right, but she's fantastic. She is so smart. She's hugely experienced. So I actually need to check out that session on how to monitor everything. There's also a session on the Agile DBA, a guide to database DevOps. That might even be interesting for beginners as well. And finally, I have two more items on my list. I thought this was the last one. There is a list of 101 blog posts that the folks over at SequelSkills have done. Now, I love this concept. They have tagged some of their blog posts 101, which are the blog posts they mean to share more for beginners. I had this link ready, and I started looking through the list, and I was like, a lot of these posts I would say we have different ideas about what 101 level content is. I was like, some of these posts are kind of advanced. And let's make sure that I actually have the right link for SQL 101 here. So it's SQL 101, SequelSkills. Okay, the page did load. My connection was a little slow there. But they have posts on some things I do think are more advanced, like, is the recovery interval guaranteed? Well, I didn't learn about the recovery interval for a while until I was a DBA. It's definitely really useful, but I think it's a little past 101. And there's some posts on selecting the right processor architecture for SQL Server. well, that might be beginner if you're the hardware purchaser. The post on AMD 7000 series processors might be a little specialized, but there's also some good ones in here that are more 101, like rebuild versus reorganize when it comes to indexes and validating SQL Server backups. So while some of these are more advanced, to know what a parallelism inhibitor is, I might need to know more about parallelism. If you scroll through these, there are some gold 101 topics in here. I'd just be a little careful choosing them because I do think some of them might be a deep rabbit hole that you go down that's just gets soup. They're really good at specialized advanced knowledge over there at SequelSkills. There are also Channel 9 SQL Server videos. Channel 9 is a Microsoft video site. And if you search this for SQL Server, there are 478 things that you can watch about SQL Server. These range from, 10 minutes to an hour. They're going to be on kind of specialized topics. And many of them are great advanced resources like adaptive query processing in SQL Server 2017. You may find in here some topics about that are pretty accessible, like SQL Server Management Studio, your one-stop shop for SQL Server perf troubleshooting. That topic may get a little advanced, but there's probably a lot you can get out of there as a beginner too. I would say this one's generally going to be more advanced resources as well, but may have some high-level overviews in there too. All right, well, I'm looking at the chat and I don't see a ton of extra resources. It may be that folks who've attended are more on the beginner side, which, hey, this is content for you. So that is really what I intended there. These resources have been extremely valuable to me and continue to be so. I mean, to be honest, even as someone who works with SQL Server all the time, the resources on this page are resources that I still use and that can really scale from beginner to more advanced person, because SQL Server is complex enough that the more that you learn, the more complex it gets. And at times you're figuring out something complex and you're like, aha, I need to go back and revisit the basics to make sure that I really understand how this works in context. And the stairways on SQL Server Central, the documentation, the Slack channel, the user groups, as you start using these resources, you'll find that you don't outgrow them and they just become more and more valuable over time. All right, so I'm going to wrap up this episode. If you have resources for SQL Server newbies that you think should be in this list, but it's after the episode's been recorded, feel free to email me at help@sqlworkbooks.com or hit up the contact form for Dear SQL DBA or join the SQL Workbook Slack and put a comment in there. And you can also put a comment on the page training resources for SQL Server noobs. I believe actually right now I forgot to enable comments on there, but I'll go ahead and fix that shortly. So thanks so much for attending this session of Dear SQL DBA. I will be recording the podcast next on June 27th is my next scheduled episode. We'll be talking about my DBA heroes. And for that session too, if you have DBA heroes who you want to suggest or say, hey, this person is awesome and here's why they've helped me, please join the live session and chime in the chat and we can give a shout out to your DBA hero, because like I've said in this, there are so many awesome people in the SQL Server community that we will barely have enough time in half an hour to give them shout outs. Thanks, folks. Have a great day, and I will talk to you in a future podcast episode.